My stepmother wanted to take my children to her place and called the children's service, but everything turned out to be a mess for her.
My name's Lavina.
I'm 31, a stay-at-home mom to 2 little boys, ages 4 and almost 6 months. My husband, Warren, works as a long-haul truck driver. His job usually keeps us afloat, but winter is brutal for work. He's had barely any hauls lately, which meant we had to take out a loan just to pay for utilities. It's not ideal, but we were making it work. On top of that, I've been struggling hard with postpartum depression since our second son was born. I've been trying to push through for my kids, but it's been overwhelming. Then 2 weeks ago, I found out I'm pregnant again. It wasn't planned. The timing couldn't have been worse. At first, I broke down not because I don't love my children, but because I didn't know how I could handle another baby right now. In a moment of desperation, I posted anonymously in a food assistance subreddit asking for help with groceries and baby supplies. The kindness of strangers was overwhelming. We received several care packages with food, formula, and diapers. I cried tears of relief. For the first time in weeks, we had a full pantry. I started feeling like maybe, just maybe, we were going to get through this. I even talked to my doctor, opened up about the depression, and we agreed it was time to try an antidepressant. Slowly, I began to feel more grounded. Even though this pregnancy came sooner than we wanted, I was starting to accept it, even feel hopeful. Warren and I were talking baby names and planning ahead. Yesterday morning, I had my first OB appointment. During the ultrasound, they couldn't see the baby, just the gestational sac, which was measuring around 8 weeks. My doctor said it might just be too early, but also mentioned the possibility of a blighted ovum, where the baby never develops. There's no clear reason for it, just misfortune. Even though I was scared about being pregnant again, hearing that was crushing. I sat in the car and sobbed while Warren held me. I wasn't expecting to feel so heartbroken, but I did. After that, we drove to my mom's place to pick up our kids. When we got home, the shock hit all over again. Our pantry was completely cleaned out. Gone. Everything, the formula, the jars of baby food, the fresh produce, even the extra diapers and wipes we had stashed. All that was left in the kitchen was a half-used box of spaghetti and a few cans of green beans. It was like someone had come in and deliberately taken anything useful for a family with kids. There were no signs of a break-in. The doors were locked. No damage to the windows. The only person besides us who has a key is my father. Now, I know in my heart that my dad would never do something like this. But my stepmother, Theda, that's a different story. Theda and I have never had a good relationship. She's been part of my life since I was 12, and things were always tense. But she's also doted on my children, always buying them gifts, offering to babysit, acting like a doting grandmother. That's why I was caught so off guard by what happened next. I told her about the help we received from the food pantry subreddit. Her reaction was immediate and cruel. She told me people like us shouldn't be having kids if we can't feed them ourselves. Then, and I still can't believe this, she demanded custody of our boys. Not suggested, not asked, demanded. I was stunned. Even in our most strained moments, she had never gone so far. Warren was furious. My dad told her to drop it, and we left. But I couldn't shake the feeling in my gut. I confronted her over the phone the next day. She denied taking the food, denied knowing anything about it. I called my dad too. He said she hadn't brought anything into the house, and he didn't think she'd do something like that. But when I mentioned filing a police report, he suddenly asked me to wait to let him talk to her first. That was the final straw. Even if we never find hard proof, this was deliberate. Someone tried to put my kids in danger. There's no way this wasn't intentional. So I filed a police report. I didn't expect much to come from it, but I needed it on record. And thank goodness I did, because the very next morning, Child Protective Services knocked on our door. The caseworker said they had received a report the previous day, an anonymous tip about unfit living conditions, specifically a lack of food in the home. They were investigating to see if our children were safe. I was mortified. But I had the police report in hand, along with what little baby food and formula we had left. I told her everything, including that the food had come from friends online, and that someone we trusted likely took it from us. She seemed to believe me. She asked a few questions, looked around, and said she'd be back in a week for a follow-up, just to make sure we'd restocked. Before she left, she asked if there were any relatives who could take the kids temporarily if it came to that. That hit me like a freight train. I told her I'd want them with my mom, not my father, and certainly not Theda. She nodded and said she didn't expect removal to be necessary, but policy required her to ask. That brings me here. I don't know what happens next. I've always done my best for my boys, and now I'm terrified someone's trying to take them away.
I never imagined my own family would turn on us like this. Update 1.
Thank you all so much for the messages, the comments, the support.
I've been overwhelmed in the best way. I read every message even if I can't reply right away.
I called CPS myself today to follow up and verify the case.
The supervisor confirmed everything, including that the original caseworker should not have shown up without calling first.
She said this wasn't flagged as an emergency situation, so policy required a scheduled visit. She also confirmed they'll be assigning a different caseworker and even mentioned they would be investigating the one who came out, given how unprofessional the visit had been. She reassured me that once the follow-up visit confirmed the kids had food and were safe, the case would be closed. So I've been gathering documents, birth certificates, pediatrician records, even printed out photos of the food packages we received.
On Monday, I'm heading to the CPS office to submit everything and collect a copy of the full report.
And yes, we've already changed the locks.
Update 2.
I wasn't going to post again so soon, but something happened this morning that left me shaken and confirmed every fear I've been trying to push down.
Let me back up. Since my last post, I've been staying close to my mom's place. She lives just 10 minutes away and has been feeding us almost every day.
She doesn't have much either, she's retired and on a limited income, but she's been giving us meals from her pantry and insisting we eat with her. I'm so grateful for her. This morning, we were over at her house again, having breakfast, a huge platter of French toast and scrambled eggs.
For the first time in weeks, I felt like a human being.
I had my babies laughing in the other room, my husband sipping coffee, and for just a moment, the world felt steady again. Then I looked at my phone and saw that I had 17 missed calls, all from Theta.
That's when I knew something was wrong.
She hadn't tried to contact us at all since we confronted her, not even after the CPS visit. It was radio silence, and we had hoped it would stay that way. But today, the calls came rapid fire. I turned off my phone and tried to enjoy the rest of breakfast, pretending that she couldn't touch us in this little bubble. We finished eating and drove back home around 10 a.m.
We pulled into the driveway to find Theta standing on our front porch, and she wasn't alone.
With her was the same CPS caseworker who had visited us the first time.
My husband, Warren, parked behind her car, which was thankfully already in the driveway.
I stayed in the passenger seat for a moment, heart racing. I looked at the kids in the back, my 4-year-old buckled into his car seat, my baby sleeping peacefully, and I felt dread crawl up my spine. Warren got out of the truck calmly, but I could see his fists clenched. He asked what they were doing here, and before he could finish, Theta started shouting. She said we had changed the locks to keep her from her grandchildren and accused us of being neglectful. Then, and I'm still reeling from this, she slapped my husband. Right there, in front of a CPS worker and our kids.
Warren didn't retaliate, of course. He's not a violent man.
He simply stepped back and looked stunned. I jumped out of the truck at that point, but the CPS worker stepped in and tried to intercept me. I told her flat out that she had no business being there, that the supervisor I spoke with said she was no longer assigned to our case and that she was supposed to call before any visits. The CPS worker told me she had gotten a call this morning reporting that I was physically abusing my child, that I had struck my 4-year-old multiple times, hard enough to draw blood.
I was speechless.
I told her we'd left the house before 8 o'clock that morning and hadn't returned until just now.
She didn't believe me.
She said Theta had called her at 9 o'clock and that when she arrived and found no one home, she assumed we were hiding. Then she demanded I take the children out of the car so she could inspect them. At this point, Warren stepped between her and the car and calmly but firmly said, "That's not happening."
I was shaking.
My children were in that car, one of them asleep, the other barely understanding what was happening. And this woman was trying to separate them from us based on a false report. That's when Theta tried to run around us and open the car door herself. She's not a small woman, and the sight of her charging toward the vehicle was terrifying. When she reached the back door and realized it was locked, she began pounding on the window next to my son's face, screaming, "Let Grandma in.
Open the door for me." My son cried. He was strapped into a 5-point harness.
There was no way he could unlock the door, even if he wanted to. Warren physically pulled Theta away from the car and told her to get off our property. Meanwhile, I tried to collect myself and told the CPS worker I was calling the police. She told me there was no need, that this was a CPS matter. But I disagreed. As I walked down the driveway to call, I noticed a familiar-looking Amazon package sitting on the backseat of Theta's car. It had our address on it. I pointed this out to the CPS worker and said, "Not only is she trespassing, she's stealing our mail." Warren tried to keep Theta from getting into her car, but she shoved past him, knocked me to the ground, and sped off across our lawn, nearly clipping me in the process. She reversed through our chain-link fence just as the police arrived.
She tried to feign innocence, suddenly acting frail and confused, but the officers weren't fooled. One of them, thankfully, was professional and took the situation seriously. He assessed the damage, took photos, and escorted Theta to the patrol car. But the other officer, I'll never forget this, asked me if I was sure I wanted to press charges, because it just seemed like a family dispute. He pointed out that there wasn't solid proof she had done anything. I showed him the damage to the fence, pointed to the package in her back seat, and mentioned the existing restraining order we had against her. He shrugged and said, "Well, you're not in danger now." If it weren't for the second officer, who took my statements seriously and scolded his partner, I don't know what would have happened. Thankfully, Theta was arrested and charged with trespassing, attempted child endangerment, and violation of a protective order. Warren and I spent the rest of the afternoon installing security cameras, replacing the bent fence panel, and comforting our kids. My oldest doesn't understand why Grandma is acting this way. He asked if he had done something wrong. That broke me. The CPS supervisor has since called to confirm that the original worker is no longer on our case, and a new one will be assigned before our next, and hopefully final, visit. We've filed another report, this time including the attempted abduction, the assault, and the stolen mail. I've printed photos of everything, and I'm working on compiling a binder of evidence, just in case this escalates further. I don't know what's driving Theta to act this way. I don't know if she genuinely thinks she's helping or if this is about control, or pride, or something darker. But I do know one thing, she's not getting anywhere near my kids again. Update 3. I honestly don't even know how to start this one. I thought things couldn't get worse after the CPS drama, after the attempted break-in, the confrontation in our yard, the false accusations. But I was wrong. If you read my last updates, you know we were trying to stay hopeful about the pregnancy. We'd had a strange first scan, just a gestational sac, no visible embryo, and we're told it could just be early. At the follow-up, we were blessed to see a healthy heartbeat. Warren and I were both crying in the office. We went home with ultrasound photos, talked names, dreamed again. So when I went in again just a week later, complaining of mild cramping, I wasn't prepared to hear that the baby no longer had a heartbeat. I couldn't speak. I sat there clutching the paper gown around me like it was going to hold me together. I hadn't even told Warren yet because he was out of state working, and his job keeps him off the grid most of the day. I couldn't reach him. The doctor gently explained our options, and we scheduled a DNC for the end of the week. I went home to an empty house, my boys were still at my mom's, and sat in silence. I didn't eat. I didn't cry at first. I just folded baby clothes we hadn't put away yet and placed them back in a bin. I made the mistake of calling my father. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe I was just looking for comfort. For some reason, I thought he'd understand. And at first, he did. He was gentle, listened, even offered to pick up the boys and let us rest after the procedure. I thanked him but declined. My mother was already helping, and I didn't feel comfortable after everything. I told him explicitly that I didn't want to speak to Theta. That I needed space. He agreed. But then, just like before, he told her. Warren called me late that night, breathless. Not because of the miscarriage, he hadn't even heard yet, but because Theta had called him over 60 times in a row while he was trying to finish his route. He assumed something horrible had happened. Someone had died. Instead, when he answered, Theta screamed at him that I was a murderer. She said I had gotten rid of the baby while he was away, that this had all been planned, that I tricked him. She said I'd never wanted this child and did what I wanted the second he left. She called me a disgrace. A failure as a mother. And Warren, God bless him, didn't engage. He hung up and called me immediately, furious and heartbroken. That's how he found out we lost the baby. I told him the truth, through sobs. He cried too. Then he promised me we'd get through it. We were supposed to have the DNC that Friday. Warren made the drive back home as soon as he could, and we went to the clinic together. It was awful. But I was grateful to have him by my side. When we came home, our house had been completely destroyed. Let me be absolutely clear, this wasn't vandalism. It was an act of rage. Our front window had been shattered. Glass scattered across the living room carpet. The door was unlocked. Inside, we found chaos. Our television had been smashed. The Xbox was in pieces. Our mattresses, even the children's, had been slashed with what looked like a kitchen knife. The new sofa we just bought was cut open, stuffing everywhere. Every single breakable dish, bowl, and cup had been shattered. Family photos were ripped and tossed across the floor. But worst of all was the clothing. Theta had piled every piece of clothing from our closets and drawers, mine, Warren's, and the kids, into the center of the living room.
She'd soaked them in bleach. Bottles of it. You could still smell the chemical sting in the air. She destroyed toys. She broke our son's favorite Lego set, tore his books, even yanked the door off his little dresser. The toilet was shattered. I don't even know how. Maybe with the golf club that was lying on the floor, the same one she probably used to break the window. We don't even own golf clubs. That means she bought it specifically to do this. Our air conditioning unit was pushed out of the window and lay in pieces in the backyard. She didn't touch the food, interestingly. Maybe she learned her lesson. Maybe she thought that would somehow make her seem less guilty. But she was still there. Passed out drunk on our lawn. Golf club in one hand, and a bottle of my wine in the other. She was surrounded by broken liquor bottles, part of Warren's novelty collection. He's a collector of weirdly shaped bottles and local spirits. He never opens them. But she smashed them all. Some were still dripping. She was lying in the grass, shrieking nonsense, occasionally howling that I had killed my baby and that she was just trying to save the children. Warren called the police while I sat on the porch in shock. I couldn't even go back inside. When the officers arrived, she was still ranting now at them. One officer tried to calm her down. The other came to speak with me and Warren. I explained what happened. I showed them the restraining order. Warren had recorded some of what she'd screamed while we waited. But even with all that, one officer had the nerve to ask, "Are you sure you want to press charges?" Seems like maybe she just got emotional. Emotional? We just got back from a medical procedure following a miscarriage, and we walked into a ruined home with 2 children's beds destroyed, and he wanted to know if I was sure. Warren had to step in. He told the officer he needed to stop minimizing what was clearly a criminal act. That's when the second officer finally took it seriously. He called it one of the worst home break-ins he'd seen. He cuffed Theta, read her rights, and took her to the station. I gave a full statement. My mom came to take the kids for the night. We spent hours photographing everything. Every broken item. Every soaked piece of clothing. We're still sorting through it. My dad didn't bail her out. He's been quiet since. He came over the next day with some tools and supplies to help repair the window. He apologized. Said he was ashamed. That's something, I guess. But I'm not sure it's enough. We've filed insurance claims. Our landlord has been understanding, thankfully. We're looking at legal options now. The restraining order will be extended permanently, and Theta has been charged with several felonies. I don't know how I'll ever feel safe in this house again. Update 4. I promised myself this would be my last update unless something significant happened. I hoped I wouldn't need to write again. But here I am, sitting in a cafe down the street from my own home, too rattled to be there alone with my kids even though I'm 99% sure she's back in jail. So, what happened? Let's rewind just a bit. After the break-in and destruction of our home, Theta was held without bail for a few days. We had more than enough evidence, videos, photos, witness statements. Our lawyer, who my dad generously paid for, walked us through filing civil claims as well as pressing charges. Theta was charged with breaking and entering, destruction of property, endangering minors, and violating a protective order. Our caseworker from CPS, now replaced with a very professional young woman named Ms. Corley, came by the house the following week for her scheduled check-in. She was kind, compassionate, and efficient. She toured the house, now half patched together, with my dad and Warren doing most of the emergency repairs, saw the food, checked on the boys, and reviewed the pediatrician records I'd organized in a binder. She confirmed the case would be officially closed pending documentation filing. For the first time in months, I felt something close to hope. We were exhausted, but things were quiet. Warren went back out on the road. My mom stayed with me for a few days until I felt okay being alone. We got a new AC unit. The insurance approved part of our claim. We replaced what we could, one thing at a time. And then yesterday, I got the call, Theta was being released. Not fully free, she was placed on supervised parole with strict conditions, including no contact with me or my family. No approach within 300 feet of our home, children's daycare, or my mom's house. Weekly check-ins with a court officer. Ongoing psychiatric evaluation. The news brought a strange mix of relief and dread. At least it wasn't probation. At least the system was recognizing she needed oversight. But deep down, I knew she wouldn't follow the rules. And I was right. This morning, I dropped my boys off at daycare around 8 a.m. I stopped for gas, picked up a few groceries, and pulled back into our driveway around 8:45. About 45 seconds after locking my front door behind me, Theta pulled up in front of my house. She got out of the car, holding something in her hand, a letter or maybe a printout, and walked straight toward the door. I froze. I didn't open it. I didn't speak. I just quietly stepped away, grabbed my phone, and called the police. As I stood behind the curtains, I could hear her muttering to herself. Then she knocked. Calmly. Like we were old friends. She said, "Lavina, sweetheart, please. Can we just talk? I think we've both misunderstood some things." She stood there for maybe 3 minutes, talking to the door. I didn't respond. 3 police cars pulled up in less than 5 minutes. She didn't run this time. She just held up her hands and started crying when they cuffed her. One of the officers knocked on my door afterward. They were polite, professional, and careful with their words. They asked me to confirm the protective order and provide the updated paperwork. I did. When I asked if this meant she'd be going back into custody, the officer said, "It's very likely. She violated direct terms of her parole on her first day out. That doesn't go unnoticed. Still, I won't breathe easy until I know she's being held again." I called my lawyer, who said he would follow up with the court in the morning. He seemed unsurprised. He's already preparing to pursue civil damages for what she destroyed during the break-in. But I'll be honest, this isn't just about damage anymore. It's about safety. It's about peace. It's about healing. Warren is still on the road and won't be home until Friday. My mom is traveling to visit her partner for a few days, so she's not available. A friend is coming to sit with me tonight because, after everything, I can't sleep alone in that house yet. I've installed more cameras. We're upgrading our front door. And we've started looking into whether we can relocate in the next 6 months. We were never planning to move, but now it feels like a fresh start might be the only way to fully move on. Some reflections, since this is my last post. If you're struggling and someone offers help, take it. The food we received from strangers online, that generosity reminded me that not everyone is out to harm. If your gut tells you someone is dangerous, listen. I ignored so many red flags because Theta had moments where she seemed loving toward my kids. Keep records. Save emails. Photograph everything. Having documented everything was the only reason CPS, police, and the courts took us seriously. Don't be afraid to talk about your struggles. My postpartum depression made me feel like I couldn't ask for help. That almost broke me. I don't know what Theta's end goal was. Custody? Control? Some delusion that she could raise our boys better than we could? It doesn't matter now. She's out of our lives, and this time, I believe it will stick. If I could hug every person who messaged me, commented words of encouragement, or offered advice, I would. Reddit gave me something I didn't know I needed, a community of kind, fierce, empathetic people who made me feel less alone. Thank you. From the bottom of my heart. Thank you all for watching the video, and see you soon.